Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and in today's video, I'll be taking a look at a knife I reviewed many years ago, and this is a knife by Fraraccio of Italy, and this is known as the Caccamo Manico. Now, it's a very simple regional knife. Here's the box that the knife came in. Coltellerie Michele Fraraccio. This is a stainless steel knife, and it is, of course, made in Italy. Here you have a silhouette of many of the patterns that they produce, and on this side as well. And, of course, your brief quality guarantee on the back. So there you are. Now, Fraraccio, from the little bit I know of them, they're not a very old company. They've been going for, I believe, a few decades, but they're definitely not one of the companies like Boker or Taylor's Eyewitness that's been going since the 1800s. But they're an interesting little company, and I believe all the knives are handmade. But this is the Caccamo Manico, which is an interesting knife from Sicily. It's a spearpoint blade, and the handles are olive wood. So this is the second of two Fraraccio knives I have. The first one is the Siciliano, or the Siciliano Stiletto, and I will say right now that that knife was, in many, many ways, a disappointment. Very poorly put together, and the only redeeming trait was its extremely strong back spring. But this knife actually is quite well made. And it's one that I don't think I've ever done a re-review on since its initial first impressions. But it's a very unique little knife. So what of the history on this knife? Now, I'm no expert on Italian or French regional knives, but from what I know, this is named after Caccamo, a town in Sicily, and the knife design is, I believe, well over 100 years old. We'll have to confirm that for you. But it's a pattern that is very much a simple working knife. Of course, with every working knife, there's always going to be a variety of it. It's made with very nice materials and costs a custom price, but this knife was around the 20-25 Canadian mark. Bear in mind that was purchased a few years ago before inflation struck, so you'd probably be looking at over 30 for one of these now. But, of course, that is Caccamo. Manico, on the other hand, just means handle, so this is the Caccamo handle knife. It's a fairly large handle, mind you. You have an easy four-finger grip on it, and I will say it's a very simple but very comfortable shape. The handle is a little bit thicker at the top, and it gets a little bit thinner at the bottom, but has this curve that makes for a very, very nice, sturdy grip. The blade, of course, has a bit of unsharpened tang, so you can also put your finger under there as well, and have an even better, safer grip as a whole. There are no bolsters on this knife, just two solid pieces of wood, and they definitely were generous, as sometimes you'll get very thin wood handles, but they definitely provided a significant chunk of olive wood. Here I have a couple examples of this type of wood. One is very similar, and this is a Spanish knife that I talked about not too long ago. This is the Kudman Vendetta Stiletto. Very, very similar in both shape, size, and material. And since I have this other knife here, probably the nicest example of olive wood, we have an Ettrick. Of course, comparing the three, in my personal opinion, there is no real competition as to which of the three has the nicest grain, but again, that could be left up to interpretation and personal preference. So there you are. So how is the fit and finish on this knife? Well, let's start with the pins. These are stainless steel pins with a fairly satin finish to go along with the wood. Very well done. The transitions are seamless. In terms of symmetry, the handles are evenly ground. One side isn't thicker than the other. Also note the stop pin. This is a slip joint with a very positive half stop. Of course, there's a nail nick, but there's enough blade to pinch it open. If I had to rate it on my personal pull scale, I'd give it an easy 6. It's a very comfortable spring tension. It's none too stiff, but at the same time is quite authoritative. Has a nice half stop, of course. And the reason I am walking the blade down is despite the despite the stop pin at the base here, this knife has shown that it accumulates blade wrap. Now you won't be able to see it now, as I have sharpened the knife, probably not very well, but we will do a cutting test. Better than I thought, but I'm not a particularly competent sharpener, but in this case I was able to get rid of the blade wrap that had been appearing up near the front of the knife. The steel on this is stainless steel, which can mean anything, but if I had to take a guess, I'm assuming this is a simple 420 steel. It's fairly soft. In fact, the blade, while granted quite thin, does have a bit of flex to it, so you are not looking at an absurdly high Rockwell hardness steel here. And typically a lot of Italian regional knives use 420 or sometimes 440 steel, the same way that French knives use 12C27. Blade play on this knife is non-existent. This is rock solid, which is very impressive. Blade centering is pretty good. A little bit off to the left, although it seems you can correct it yourself. Now it's almost a little bit off to the right. I'm not particularly picky about knives when you can just push the blade back to center. Of course, you shouldn't need to do that, but it's far better than a knife that is consistently staying to one side. So I will say good job for the centering. If not perfect, it's certainly good. Also note the fact that because of the blade's profile, if it weren't for this extended bit at the back, the blade tip would be protruding. So aside from the fact that it provides a very comfortable grip, this also keeps the blade from sticking up when open. So very interesting little design feature there. The blade has a very nice satin finish for the price. It's quite reflective. And of course you have the name of the knife here, which is done in a very nice font. Has a bit of an etch in, not particularly deep, but shouldn't be that easy. It shouldn't be removed particularly easily, so that is good. You don't have to worry about wear as much. And here is their logo with M. Fraraccio inox. So this is very much a stainless blade, and there are no markings on the other side. Again, we have olive wood for the handles here. Very nicely done, very smooth. Provides a nice look to the knife. I quite like olive wood, although it does tend to be quite dry. but a little bit of oil will go a long way, as of all the wood handles I think I can name, olive wood will hold oil for the longest period of time. So if it's dry and you give it a coat of oil or put some beeswax on it, it will usually remain moist for a very long time, which is something worth celebrating. The blade grind did come a little bit wonky, as you can see at the base, with a very nice sharpening choil. It is a little bit off at the very base of the edge. I did not do that myself, but I tried my best to, at very least, touch up the edge to make sure it was in using condition. Now, this isn't a flaw per se, but something that does seem a bit strange to me is the way that the spring is housed. Now, this is a very clearly recessed spring. As you can see, it's quite a bit in the liners there, which of course are steel, by the way. There is no gapping between the liners and handles, which is something very much worth celebrating. And holding it up to the light, there is no gapping between the spring and the liners either. So this is a gapping-free knife. But I will admit, I'm not a huge fan of how this looks, with a very recessed spring in there. The blade is where it should be, but the spring is quite a bit lower. Also, another thing that I've noticed, and Fraraccio tends to do this, they use stainless steel on the blades, but make the springs out of carbon steel. And for me, I don't particularly understand the logic. Either you make your blade with carbon steel, and then, by all means, match it with the spring, or leave everything stainless. If a person wants a stainless steel knife, well, they're probably expecting the blade and every other steel part to be stainless. And I do not know the inner workings of how Fraraccio makes their knives, but if they could perhaps use the same steel or a similar style of steel on the spring that they use on their blades, I think that would work a lot better, as you don't have to worry about tarnish on the blade, and so it might be easy to forget about putting some form of oil on the spring if you're not particularly concerned about the blade. So, interesting design choice, but not one I'm particularly fond of. But aside from this cosmetic strangeness, this is an incredibly well put together knife. Everything is centered, everything's even. It's a very, very nice blade. It's certainly not small, and I believe this would not be UK legal. Give you a quick measurement here. You are looking at an overall length of just over 7.5 inches, with just over 3 1/4 on the blade, and exactly 3 on the cutting edge. So I suppose I say this all the time, if you wanted to take the risk, you may be able to get away with it, as the cutting edge is still 3 inches. But again, I do not recommend that. As always, if you are already near that 3-inch limit, try to stay as far away from it as you can, but if it's right on the 3 inches, I personally wouldn't risk that. So again, to all my UK viewers, I am no lawyer, but if you're going by measurement alone, this is a 3-inch cutting edge. There you are. For an overall everyday carry working knife, I think that this is really a good choice. It has a nice spring, very, very nice action. I think that whatever the blade steel is, it sharpens up like a dream, and again has a nice finish as well. Not particularly a fingerprint magnet. Again, the wood with lack of bolsters makes just for a very nice, simple handle to hold on to. Very comfortable if you have larger hands, or, well, medium size as well. But overall, this is a very nice little knife. And compared to the almost horror show that my last Fraraccio knife had to offer, I was very pleasantly surprised to see this. As the other knife, and I should probably get around to re-reviewing it eventually, it had a loop at the back for for a lanyard, and the actual ring itself was cracked. So the thing that's supposed to hold the lanyard was already falling off. The handles, which were a form of composite, had scratches and cracks galore. The liners, spring, and even the base of the blade, I believe, had started accumulating rust. There was blade wrap. If I remember correctly, there might have even been a bit of bad blade centering. It was just a terrible knife. I haven't taken it out in a while, as you can probably imagine, but perhaps this very nice knife will lead me to bringing out the dark past that is this brand and the relation I've had with it. But as a whole, for a knife that cost $20 to $30, I really can't fault this. I'm sure, again, not knowing the exacts of the steel, being uncertain of whether or not it would hold up over long-term use, I'm not entirely sure about that, but for me, it seems to work well enough. It sharpens up nicely, it cuts, and for its price, I can't fault it. So, there you are. There's the Fraraccio Knives Italy, Caccamo Manico, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.